Welcome to the Healthcare Technology Report, a leading information source on healthcare technology companies and solutions. In this episode, we speak with Kurt Jacobus, Chairman and CEO of restor3d, a company specializing in patient-specific 3D printed musculoskeletal implants. Founded in 2017, restor3d combines expertise in additive manufacturing, osseointegrative materials, AI-driven planning tools, and in-house design and manufacturing to support more personalized approaches to orthopedic care. Kurt previously led MedShape and Vertera Spine, both acquired by major orthopedic device companies, and has spent much of his career at the intersection of biomedical engineering and medical device innovation. At restor3d, he oversees efforts to bring customized implants to surgeons and hospitals through a fully integrated digital workflow and rapid manufacturing capabilities. I'm your host, RJ Lumba. We hope you enjoy the show. If you like the episode, click to follow. Kurt, thanks so much for taking the time. Appreciate it.
My pleasure, RJ. Looking forward to it.
So you get your PhD in mechanical engineering, go to McKinsey, then you work for J.M. Huber. And then after that, it seems like you were off to the races, meaning you were involved with a lot of different companies, taking the leadership helm, helping these companies succeed. To start off, tell us about that path and how you were able to kind of quickly start assuming these kind of top of the industry type roles.
Very good question. So it was not a direct path at all, RJ. So I grew up in a house with academics. We didn't have business people in our home. We talked about science and technology, and I still love those things, and kind of took my schooling in that direction and got a PhD in mechanical engineering because I thought I might want to be a university professor. But when I got done with that, I kind of realized I had an affinity for business, but I also realized I wanted to have some real impact on the world around me, and it felt hard to do in at least the portion of academics I was in. And I wanted to work more in a team environment and make some significant changes. And so that's why I was enticed by joining McKinsey. Learned a lot of business there in 4 years. I learned very quickly I did not want to stay at McKinsey. It's a great organization, but I just did not want to be a consultant. I wanted to do something that I had some ownership for, right, and could have some real impact with. And then after Huber, then basically spent my time doing startup work. And I would like to tell you I felt well prepared day one. I took our CEO role in 2005 for the first time. I had to figure out 90% of it on the fly. And it probably has taken me at least a decade to be very comfortable doing that. And that was a decade ago. So I've been much more comfortable doing it. But I think it's foolish to be comfortable in a position like this because I think, and especially in a startup environment, you need to be discomforted. You need to be pushing into technical areas of discovery or commercial areas or product areas that are new and different. And so don't get me wrong, I'm not too comfortable, RJ.
Curious, now with your experience, you assumed the CEO role fairly early in your career. What were the challenges that you faced then? And I assumed you kind of gradually got better. You solved all the problems you were seeing with how you were leading. And then now you're at this stage where you're perfecting the leadership as a CEO.
I think the hardest part, first time CEO, even with a good board, is you don't know what you don't know. Business is a pretty dynamic, especially commercial business, a dynamic organization, many, many stakeholders, right? And you don't even have knowledge of all the work that needs to be done. And you don't have any of the business systems or tools to do that work, right? And you certainly haven't seen them done well, right? And that is the hardest part. So someone says to you as a first-time CEO, build a sales channel. And if you've not come out of a selling organization, what does that even mean, right? You'd say that part is incredibly difficult. And I think like most people, when I do something the first time, I'm probably not at my best, right? It takes a few times to do that. And so that's the hardest part. Raising money, well, how do I raise money? You have to figure those things out. And I think having seen the entire script now, so we've co-founded 4 businesses, all of them gone commercial, done very well clinically and commercially, and have come to 3 trade sales. Once you see that full script, you tend not to get surprised. And you tend also to rely on having seen things being done very well. That is the hardest part as an early CEO. So I had a good board early on. I relied on them and a bunch of folks that I'd worked with that I trusted. But, I think this is true of anyone. I also relied on some people that I probably should not have relied upon, RJ, and made some mistakes. But that's part of learning is making mistakes.
And with the four companies you mentioned, is that with the same management team?
We've had a lot of overlap, actually. So my co-founder in all those businesses, the same co-founder, he's on the faculty at Duke now. And in the early days, he's on the faculty at University of Colorado, and middle days at Georgia Tech. And so that's been similar. And then a number of the people in the engineering kind of product development function we've known going all the way back to 2007, 2008. I think we all know what to expect from one another, and that's a lot. And so there's a good part of that, which is you're not having to, sort of find someone and train them in how you do work. The hard part is when you bring in people that are new to the organization, it can sometimes feel, imagine a little clubbish or a little cliquey, or, these folks have known each other. So RJ, if you and I had known one another 20 years and we went to a cocktail party together, and we're meeting someone we never met before, we'd have a lot to talk about. You and I probably would, and less in common. That's not unusual. So it's definitely an adjustment period for new hires in a business like this, just because we have a management team that has a lot of experience with one another.
Let's talk about restor3d. It seems like an obvious problem that you're solving, and I presume there's other competitors in the market. You've recently raised over $100 million. You got Partners Group, fantastic asset management firm. But yeah, tell us about, did you get it started as a founder, a co-founder, investor? How did it start? And then where are we today?
So the idea for it emerged probably 12 years ago in a foot and ankle business that we were running at the time. And so we had surgeons approach us and with unique patient needs, ones that couldn't be solved with that off-the-shelf implant. And that can be an anatomical challenge or a pathological challenge. And we were asked to do some things as a technology forward organization to make patient-specific implants. And for a while we said no, but ultimately realized that the tools were emerging, particularly software tools that could turn a medical diagnostic like a CT scan into a patient-specific design. And in particular, 3D printing of metals and polymers that could make implants and instruments quickly and cost effectively and capably. And so my co-founder took his lab at Duke and began looking into that. And that had us then begin servicing those cases on a one-off basis. And we began then a search for how much demand is there. And when it became clear to us that the software and production tools were ready and the demand was there, we started the business. We founded it in 2017. I'm one of the co-founders. And some of the other ones were PhD students that came out of this lab at Duke. And we basically set forth then to solve the most difficult problems in orthopedics. Ones where you have a patient that's got dwarfism, or someone that's very large, or someone that has really unique pathology that can't be solved, and set forth to solve that very difficult problem, not just once, but hundreds and thousands of times, and not in a way that would have us not making money, but in a way that would make us competitive from a financial perspective with kind of the traditional ortho model, which is off the shelf, 6 sizes fits all. And solving those difficult problems, which you've been doing for all the way along in the last 8 years, then has allowed us to very elegantly solve less difficult and everyday problems. So the things that we've learned there and our ability to produce difficult things help us in less difficult cases, and then more in everyday cases, and then run-of-the-mill cases. And so that's been the evolution of our business. We've kind of worked backwards from difficult cases into everyday cases and constructed the product portfolio that can do that. And that means for a surgeon, we're not only personalized to their patient needs. You have an everyday case, here's an off-the-shelf implant, very divergent case or something that's very different, but also to the surgeon's choice. The surgeon wants to do something simple in this case or difficult, and that's proven to be a really winning ingredient in ortho. And so we do, RJ, everything in ortho, head to toe. We do stuff in the cranium, maxillofacial area, all the way down to your big toe and everything in between. But our bigger segments mirror the bigger segments in ortho, meaning large joint, shoulder, hip, knee, ankle.
And how prevalent is your solution in the market? Meaning how many orthopedic surgeons are using your system?
So active surgeons right now are about 650, and we only sell in the US. We have a little bit of the business in the UK. And if you think about that, they're inclusive of some surgical podiatrists that do some of the foot and ankle business. We're at about 0.5 percentage point penetrated into the business. So a good starting market position. And we're very transparent about the business. We'll come up close to 90 million in sales this year. We have a business that's growing about 25 percentage points. We expect that to continue well into the future. And we operate with very limited competition. So no one really has the solution that we have, which is with a single software platform and a single production asset and a single set of instruments for a procedure, the surgeon can make the choice from something very complicated and complex all the way to something very simple. We have some people that dabble in small areas there. Traditional ortho does the 9 sizes fits all kind of model, and we compete with them there. But in terms of patient specificity, we're without question the world leader in that area.
And how does it work in real life? So the doctor has access to the software, you employ kind of this technology with x-rays and, perfect fit, 3D printing. Where does that all happen? And can you give us a sense for the sequence of those actions?
You understand the business very well, RJ. Maybe we should recruit you over here. You've certainly done your homework, but it is exactly that. So surgeon-facing software, the surgeon will engage with the software to medical diagnostic, in most cases CT scan. They'll pick a surgery date, and then software tools in the back end for 95% of the cases will create a model of the patient's anatomy automatically and create a design automatically that gets ported to one of 2 production facilities. So we make all of our stuff in-house, with the exception of some reusable instruments. We have a couple of vendors that do that for us, but we make everything. We go from powder, metal or plastic, to product inside the 4 walls of this facility I'm in Durham here today, and one that we have in Boston. And that work is largely driven by 3D printing of the implants and instruments and some finishing activities. For example, you might need to cut an area to have it have a very smooth surface and interact with another area, or cut an area to have it hold a screw for fixation. But that's what we do. And we've done a case in as short as 38 hours. We're generally available to promise the market at 6 weeks. We do a lot of expedites at 2 to 3 weeks, but it might be interesting for you and the audience to know that the median case for our business is at 10 weeks. And so, RJ, if you went in, I hope you don't need a knee, but if you needed a knee and you went in and the surgeon said you need a knee and you consented to it today, you're going to have to probably talk to a significant other, family member, to help you get back and forth. You have to line that up. Maybe you need some time off work. You'll need to get a pre-op checkout, right? And you'll also need to get probably a surgical insurance authorization. That takes some time, but we can move very quickly as the case may be. But most of our stuff, we do at about 10 weeks.
And, what's to prevent one of the behemoths like J&J from coming into this space?
We operate, against really 4, if not 5 big competitors. And I think most of them are household names: Stryker, J&J, Smith & Nephew, and Zimmer Biomet, and a company called Enovis. And these are very capable competitors run by a very good management team, right? So, but they are very much wedded to sort of the 7 sizes fits all ortho model. And part of the challenge is they have a large installed base of instruments and inventory. So think about hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars of forward deployed instruments and inventory. So that's hard to walk away from in all the marketing that's required to present that to the marketplace. These organizations, look, these are great organizations, and we're honored to compete against them every day. They're probably better at selling and marketing than they are at innovating. And so they'd have to probably be a little better at innovation to do what we do it well. But I think the last part is they've generally thought about this area of the business with patient-specific implants and instruments as a bit of a backwater. And part of that's history, RJ. So if you look at ortho going all the way back to the 80s, many of them have what they call a customs department, where they would do one case here for a very busy surgeon and one case there for a very busy surgeon, more as a marketing enterprise to keep that surgeon happy, and less as a true clinical tool, and certainly not as a core business. They would lose money on those things. And so I think they're sort of ensnared to some extent by this instrument inventory position that they have, but also with the thinking that this is a distraction from their core business, which is to fill a warehouse with 8 sizes of something and have the sales team deploy those into surgical fields.
And as I understand, with some of these companies will have people in the operating room, observing and interacting with the doctor if the doctor has a specific question. Do you do the same thing?
We do, yeah. And that's basically standard here in the US, right? So there are very few orthopedic procedures of any complexity that don't have a sales representative or a clinical specialist in the operating room. And we do the same thing. It's been interesting. Our capacity to grow this business has required a very limited selling and marketing spend, especially the growth rate. And I do believe part of that's because we're doing cases that others will not do. And that's proven to be very sticky and a very good way to get started with accounts. But the other part that's been interesting is we've not had, don't get me wrong, we have some very sophisticated clinical specialists and some very sophisticated salespeople, but almost all of our cases, about 95% of them, are planned. And so there's a surgical plan that even a semi-capable surgical support rep or specialist could look at and say, I get it, right? I understand what we're doing. And the surgeon, of course, sees that plan beforehand. That's coming into fashion ortho, but certainly even 10 years ago, most of the way ortho surgeons, conducted their cases is they'd open a patient, figure it out. The inventory's there. There's like an Ace Hardware of hips or knees or shoulders, and they'd kind of grab the stuff. This planning has made it much easier to have arm's length capable specialists and reps in the OR.
What's the vision for the company? Is this something, I mean, you're growing at a fast clip, 25% a year. Do you raise another round, private round? Is this thing going to go public?
We are exploring both of those, RJ. We've had a lot of pull, from investors, and I think investment bankers, of course, they earn some money in doing these things, right? Into the public market. We think we can do quite well out there. And I think there's a high likelihood in the next several years, provided market conditions are good, we would do that. And we do it for the reason that we think the story will resonate very well with both health, med tech specialist investors, but also generalist investors, right? It's a sort of thing that, as you said, and as we first got started, I kind of get it. You're going to restore my healthy anatomy with an exact replica using 3D printing. That's worked very well for us with generalist investors as well. And, we've looked at some businesses that have done some things like this, like Align, and you probably know that business well. I don't know if they've been on your show, but, they took what was a off the shelf bunch of sizes of orthodontia equipment and basically made it patient specific, right? And built a terrific business around it and pulled down the instrument and inventory burden, right? And took a bunch of share. I think they're doing roughly $5 billion in sales now. And we would see a future like that for us. And I think we've got a long runway ahead of us. The markets we serve in the US are about 18 billion right now. We're at about a half percentage point of that. And we think in the public markets, we could not only have a visible story that would attract investors, but also a runway where we can grow it and reward those investors. So I think that's the most likely path. We don't need a ton of capital. The business is producing a loss still, but we expect with growth into next year, we'll begin to kind of get to free cash flow positive. We have some balance sheet investments that we'd have to make, but we don't need a huge amount of money to continue to do what we do.
It would seem with your experience and the team or the teams that surround your companies that you wouldn't necessarily need a lot of additional help or operational expertise from an investor. I'm curious if when you think about investor, it's more so capital, the financial capital, less so the other things that sometimes private equity firms provide to their portcos.
I think that is probably fair to say. This is not our first ortho business. But that said, we still have a lot to learn, right? I've not run a publicly traded business. The right equity sponsors can certainly help open those doors for you and help you be prepared for that. That would be quite helpful. But, it's also interesting. This business is getting to a size and scale and a cash flow profile where it's going to look and feel more like a private equity enterprise than a growth equity enterprise. And we typically not run our businesses with that very hardcore KPI driven private equity lens for the reason they've just been growing very quickly and they've been smaller, RJ. And so the levers that they need to pull are more obvious. You're not chasing basis points, you're chasing whole percentage points of this, that, and the other. And so that, I think they've been, I can tell you just with Partners Group, having been involved in the business a short period of time, they certainly have a discipline there that's been helpful to us. Those things we are enjoying, RJ, but I would be worried about our business if any investor showed up and was teaching us a lot about ortho. I think we ought to be ortho experts at this point. If we're not, RJ, something's wrong.
Last two questions. Can you tell us about a person who's had a profound influence on you?
Oh, this is a very, very good question. I'll give you two examples. I know you only asked for one, and this business does this to us regularly. A couple of Fridays ago, we had a visit from a patient, a 17-year-old young woman that had osteosarcoma in her right arm. And she ultimately was at risk of actually losing the arm, but also, obviously, because untreated, she could lose her life. And we had replaced her entire humerus, which is a long bone of her upper arm. She visited us with her parents. She wanted to meet the engineers that had made the product and see the production facility where it was made. Her surgeon also came along to join her, which is great. And so it's pretty extraordinary. A 17-year-old woman, she also wearing a sleeveless shirt, sort of proudly displaying the surgical wound that was there, which is pretty amazing. And it's the sort of thing that makes you realize how fragile life is and how the stuff we can do can impact lives in very, very meaningful ways. And so I get the pleasure of having that happen probably once a month in this business, if not more often. And that's part of the reason I'm very, very thrilled to do the work that I do here. The other one would be my dad. He was an academic, but he had a streak in him that required facts, not opinion, right? And healthy debate and discussion. And that, I think, is the sort of thing that works, of course, very well in an academic context where he came from. But in a business context, I think it's even more important. And that certainly aided me well in a PhD and aided me well at McKinsey. They certainly run their business that way. And we do this as well. And so those are two folks that have had profound influence on me. My dad's not with us anymore, but still with me in spirit.
Last question. Can you tell us about a charity cause or other endeavor that you're passionate about?
We do a fair amount of work to help out some patients. As an example, I shared with you this young woman.
Mm-hmm.
We do some cases where we often do cases at a deep discount or even at little to no cost to help some patients that are in need. So that's in the context of the business that we do. The other thing that I do, and it's sort of probably less heartwarming, but I think it's very important. I spend a lot of time in educating role and a counselor role to a bunch of young startups. And, that's not the most heartwarming activity out there, but doing startup work is hard. It's extremely difficult. It's lonely. It's scary. Anyone that's doing it always is learning a lot. It's easy to fail. It's hard to succeed. And I have a great deal of respect for folks that take that plunge, right? And if I can be helpful to them in any ways, large or small, I really enjoy doing that. And over the years, that's probably meant I've been very close to 40 or 50 startups. I've seen some extraordinary things happen. And I do think, this world we live in today is an uncertain world. It seems getting increasingly uncertain with each passing day, RJ, for whatever reason. But I think the solutions that we're going to see in this world that help us are ones that are probably in large measure going to emerge from small emerging startups driven by entrepreneurs. And and many of the things that I work on to help solve there, I've got involved in a company that has the only objective diagnostic for autism. Yeah. And that's a huge area of unmet need. That feels very rewarding. I've also got involved in a startup that's got a pain mitigation tool that can obviate opioids, which has a huge burden on us. And so those things, I'd spend a lot of time doing that. I find it to be very rewarding. It's taxing, but it's my way of finding some way to improve the world we live in.
Excellent. Well, Kurt, I want to thank you again for taking the time. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you, RJ. Appreciate it. Thanks for the good work you do.